I'm Catherine Reid, host of the St. Paul Forum, and coming up next, I'm speaking with the Department of Transportation Commissioner Zelle about transportation in Minnesota. That's next on the St. Paul Forum. Welcome to the St. Paul Forum. I'm Catherine Reid, and joining me today is the Commissioner of Transportation, Charles Zelle. Welcome, Commissioner.
Thank you, Catherine. It's great to be here.
Thank you so much for taking time. So we are in the middle of a legislative session and a lot of conversation about transportation, but I want to go back to what brought you to you have a personal interest in transportation. Tell us a little bit about how you learned and decided to be involved in the field of transportation.
Well, thank you. I grew up in Minnesota and in a family business, Jefferson Lines, a bus company that's about 95 years old, and it was founded by my grandfather when the roads were dirt. And I actually had no intention of being part of a family business, but I came back from New York and the business was struggling, and like anything you struggle with, I learned it. I learned the communities of Minnesota, and it's just really an honor to be kind of close to transportation. And believe me, I had no aspiration to be in this job, but
but here you are.
Here I am.
And as I remember, Jefferson Lines, there's the Greyhound and Jefferson in this community, right?
Right.
And how does that divide up? How does that get shared?
Well, Jefferson is an intercity bus carrier, and it took its name from the old Jefferson Highway, which ran from Winnipeg to all the way to New Orleans. And again, that was a national dirt highway in the 20s. And so Jefferson is kind of started in Minnesota, but it expanded. And now we're in 13 states, from Grand Forks to Texarkana and Green Bay to Missoula. So we're in 13 heartland states. Greyhound is really in other markets. Jefferson serves 60 points in Minnesota, and Greyhound.
It's really a Minnesota. It has at its heart Minnesota
Right.
Anyway. And in order to do this job, which you said you didn't aspire to, but you've always been politically active.
Yes.
I think that's kind of in your roots too.
Yeah.
Did you have to take a leave from the business, or are you able to? How does that work?
Well, it's funny. I came at a time when the person who was the chief financial officer for Jefferson was really kind of slowly transitioning to become more of a chief operating officer, and when the governor suggested this possibility, and I said I have a conflict, I can't do that, and he said conflicts aren't illegal, you disclose them and make sure, frankly, you have some experience in the state. So fortunately, Jefferson is in good hands, and I think
that's great. Yeah, and I think that's always helpful, both to understand that you definitely have expertise in your field, and you kind of got that handled. So transportation is, on the one hand, maybe not everybody's favorite topic, but at the same time, it's probably, next to the weather, the biggest thing we complain about in Minnesota. How do you draw the landscape of transportation in the state? What is it how do you piece it all together? It's everything from a walking path to a sidewalk to bike paths to highways to bridges to...
It really is, and that's what I find so endlessly fascinating, and what I think, in part I think it's why transportation has become a much more of a top-tier issue for all Minnesotans, because it is the foundation of so much of what we care about and what we do. In fact, we've somewhat kind of altered the MnDOT vision statement recently, that we are an agency that manages a multimodal transportation system, all modes, to maximize the health of our people, the environment, and our economy. The point is that all these different transportation systems, all this puzzle, much more than just roads and bridges, it's airlines, it's trains, transit, as you say, bicycles and pedestrians. It's all fits together in a puzzle that supports our economy, it supports our lifestyles, and it's getting increasingly under stress.
It is under stress. Now, we know that the mayor of St. Paul just yesterday said We've got 20 worst streets, and if we missed one, nominate.
No.
I mean, how bad? So what is I think everyone feels like the potholes are the worst they've ever been. That was a conversation over lunch today.
Right.
We've also endured a difficult winter, but what does this infrastructure investment, are we under-investing in our infrastructure, and what does that mean if we are?
Well, Catherine, you said it, and the mayor was great yesterday. I mean, not great, but he was really being very straightforward. We have underinvested, and even though this winter was really tough, I mean, tough on all of us, the extreme temperatures, the snow, the ice, and MnDOT is way over budget in trying to clear roads and put down the clear ice. But all the potholes are a result of not just a tough winter, it's because the structure underneath all of our roads is slowly decaying. And you know, roads and bridges, they're like any other asset, or like your house. You know, you have to fix the roof, and you have to repair it, and you have to maintain it. And over time, I think a lot of our highways and bridges, and both the city of St. Paul, but also the state system, need constant care, and ultimately reconstruction, which was the mayor's point.
His point is that they're not just going to get fixed, they need to be taken to the ground in a sense and built back up again? Is that what he was
That's
referring
exactly
to?
it. I mean, we take care of bridges, and you know, we wash them, and we patch little holes, and we make sure that they're structurally sound. And you can extend the life of an asset or a bridge or a road. You know, this last year we reconstructed the Blotnick Bridge in Duluth. We have a major bridge project right here in St. Paul.
A Lafayette Bridge.
The Lafayette Bridge, which is truly a replacement. They don't last forever. You can.
Right, it's really being replaced, and
Correct.
My understanding too with that bridge is that if one thing had failed, the whole thing could have failed. So we stepped in plenty of time to make sure that didn't happen.
I could say this now, I would say it before, it was structurally, we think, in worse shape than the I-35 bridge was.
I was afraid you were going to say that. I think there have been a few comments to that effect and if for anyone who didn't know, that's the bridge that fell down.
Correct.
The great tragedy of our state that,
but, you know,
we lost that bridge.
The legislature and then Governor Plenty, well, it wasn't Governor Plenty, the legislature overrode Governor Plenty in providing additional funds to repair bridges and to replace bridges like Hastings, and of course we're building a new bridge in the St. Croix, and I'm safe to say that the bridges are in pretty good shape in Minnesota, but they need constant refurbishment and maintenance and repair. So I think over time the challenge is that we really don't have funding to keep the system in the shape that it needs to be for our future.
Well, one thing, I noticed somebody who spends a lot of time he has an expertise in environmental and as an international expertise, and he was commenting, his expertise isn't roads and transportation though, but he said, outside my house there is a cobblestone or brick street that is in better repair than everything that's on top of it. And his question was twofold. Is it, are we building them well enough? Was there something we understood in the past that we no longer understand? And then on top of it, he was thinking about it environmentally. And your vision statement, your mission statement really speaks to our health, our environmental health, as well as our ability to get our jobs done. So I was curious because I know that water resources, what happens to our water is an increasing piece of attention that has to do with how the roads are built too. What happens? So are you seeing new technologies or new ideas that are going to be part of this infrastructure rebuilding, or have we even thought far enough to look at better ideas around how we build our roads?
Well, our roads and the technology evolves every year. And I have a picture in my commissioner's office of a gravel road with two old buses, my grandfather's buses.
Yeah.
And that was Highway 52 back in 1923. It used to take 4 hours for the bus to go from St. Paul down to Rochester. Now we look at it, it's pretty much a freeway. But we build roads differently, and yes, I think some roads lasted longer, but we have so much more traffic, so much more freight traffic, and so they take a lot more.
The truck traffic, essentially, is all the
truck traffic takes a lot of takes a beating on roads. But you think about the environmental construction. We have hydrologists and environmentalists and engineers So when water washes over a roadway, it goes into special culverts so that the salt doesn't go into our groundwater or into our drinking water. We think about actually even when snowplows are coming through the metro, we know the temperature of the pavement, we know the temperature of the air. We make sure that we use enough salt, but a lot less salt because we can be more specific about what's really required. So I think over time technology has helped us be better environmental stewards. But I think of that larger vision, it's also about saying we need probably more than single occupancy cars. The whole idea about these min-pass lanes, and particularly the one that's under construction in St. Paul, is allows express buses and for us to get more people to work, more people to school without having the highways just clogged with single occupancy cars. And so I think the idea that we need to be smart about our investments is to think how we can be both aware and thoughtful about livability issues and yet kind of get the mobility, the access of people to get around.
So really thinking, I know one of the things we talk about, I think our time spent in cars is on the higher end nationally. I think that was a study that I heard. And that is to your point, which is too many individual cars. At one time, I do remember some policy decisions where you drive right into the parking ramp in downtown, 394. I always looked at that policy and I thought, maybe for the buses, but do we really want to make it that easy for a single car to drive right down to that parking ramp downtown? But maybe I see,
Some of those ramps now, they're owned by MnDOT, and we actually give much better parking rates to those that are carpooling.
As I say, it is partially a carpool incentive to restrict the number of people driving.
And vehicle miles, we always track how many vehicles are on the road over the course of over years. And vehicle miles traveled, which is one of the measures we look at, is actually forecasted to be pretty flat. We're not going to see in the state of Minnesota big increases like we've had over the past 20 years.
Interesting.
And
these other transportation systems methods are picking up steam.
And some of it's generational. We find millennials, my own children.
Thank goodness.
They would, thank goodness.
Yeah.
They'd much rather think about not just transit, but biking and different ways to get around that actually many times are not only more cost effective, they're more efficient.
Right.
We think about the different transportation alternatives we have,
Yeah, there's so many choices. If you're just joining us, I'm speaking with Commissioner Zelle, Commissioner of Transportation, about our transportation system in Minnesota. So infrastructure investment, I can say I love it that generationally we do have such a different approach. They don't necessarily want to own cars. They are much more interested in car sharing. They are expecting public transportation. We've got some important investments in transit. We've got the Green Line opening in just a couple of months. Great coming
Very exciting.
We're very excited. We're planning a party at University in 280. But we still have some questions. There's a little bit of the not in my backyard issue.
Yes.
Let's talk about that connecting the dots around major streams of, we're really behind as a state in our investments, and we're behind as a country in those investments. So can you help us think about that, what that looks like?
Well, and thank you. Yes, I've been actually traveling this day talking about the multimodal need and the gap in funding, which is as much to maintain the system we have and to expand it in key areas. And that's where Chair Haig from the Met Council and I have been presenting together in the Metro to talk about kind of a longer term, 20-year building out a system, which is really roads and bridges and transit systems. They really work kind of very much as a puzzle. And so both MnDOT and Met Council have been great collaborators. And when you think about the controversy about Southwest Light Rail, which is currently going before the Met Council, there's a neighborhood in Minneapolis, and it's difficult. These are large infrastructure projects, and they are disruptive to some neighborhoods, and hopefully not over time. But to provide kind of affordable transportation access for the neighborhoods of St. Paul to great jobs at United Healthcare and Comcast and Super Value. I mean, this is why transit has to be not just for the next generation, for people living here today, to provide ways to get to school and to work in a
Absolutely.
convenient and affordable way.
And people are so excited about it. You know,
Yes.
and I've been, I have a office location right at the Green Line, and so we've been
You're going to luck
going
out.
through that experience for such a long time, and it is disruptive. Well, and there's a lot of stages in the development of it, but it is so exciting to see something be put in place that really is going to change the landscape. And I keep kind of joking that as soon as that train runs, you know, we're just going to be, we're so busy to walking over it. You know, we're so busy
Right.
Used to it not being used, now to experience it with the switch turned on.
Right.
It's going to be exciting to see how it changes things, but to keep connecting it and the ongoing investment. So this rate of investment and this question of financing, I mean, these are really big questions. How do you want people to educate themselves about what we need to do as a state, a city, a country, to get our heads around what needs to happen?
Well, you know, I think joining in the conversation, it's really happening now. It's happening at the legislature. I think what has been really different this year, and which has been very exciting, is we have a coalition of transit, environmental activists, bicyclist association, along with road builders and highway advocates, and at times they were actually kind of, you know, not necessarily on the same page. Everybody's come together to say that infrastructure is part of a larger puzzle. We all need to take it seriously, and I find great you know, interest in that the business community is taking it seriously. They are not supporting additional revenue for transportation this year, but I have a meeting with the chamber tomorrow. I'm actively working with businesses around the state who know we cannot flourish, we cannot maintain our prosperity without that infrastructure investment. So I'm really hopeful that next session, after an election, the governor has certainly been listening to my proposals for a long-term, kind of a 10-year plan, which is getting kind of greater support. So I would call on people to go to a MnDOT website or check into any of the many citizens forums, because I think you'll hear this conversation both in cities, counties, and certainly at the state level.
That's fantastic. And I think this longer term view is what you're arguing for, as well as, you know, the immediacy. I can remember hearing Sue Haig, the chair of the Met Council now. At the time, she was not in that role. I have to think she was, I guess, at the county level.
Right.
But she started talking about how we were 30 years behind in our investments here, that we have just needed to make those investments. And I don't know if she would describe it differently now that we have at least gotten the light rail in, so we made that step forward. But I think that's Minnesotans need to understand there is a way in which we are not, we think of ourselves as being one of the top, but this is not necessarily an example of us being on the top.
Well, we enjoy this robust economy. We're one of the fifth, I think, fastest growing economy in the United States.
It's a really great success story.
And this wonderful quality of life, but we can't take it for granted. We are falling behind. Denver's, Salt Lake City, these are cities, Portland, Seattle, making major investments in their ways to get their citizens around and to think about the future. And frankly, we are behind, and that's why I think kind of looking not just the politics, but getting to the arithmetic of what it takes to be competitive with other regions. And I think Sue Haig is a great articulator of that challenge.
Yes, she has always been. So what do you think of generationally? I know we said that this younger generation sees transportation differently, but how do they see this as something they want to, you know, how do they get their heads around this longer term investment, and how do they think about this, what you're saying is getting people who tend to maybe see themselves on opposite sides of the table, how are they going to form those coalitions, do you think? Is it generally been through conversation? Is it?
A lot through conversations, corridors, meeting with other corridors, cities meeting with other cities. And I find this really gratifying because, you know, traditionally there's been the tension between the metro versus greater Minnesota, north versus south, transit versus roads. There's a growing consensus that there's needs throughout the state. And we think about any kind of funding, usually user fees, gas tax, registration fees, motor vehicle sales tax. By state constitution, 40% of any additional revenue flows to counties and cities. So there's really a large kind of holding hands, and hopefully on a bipartisan basis to look at where the investments are needed to maintain our growth. And there's actually pretty solid work we've been doing at MnDOT, and other business groups have looked at the pretty solid return on investment. So treat it like any business. There's a business case for this asset investment.
And I think too, I mean, we've been very fortunate that we are, as you pointed out, a job-creating state. You know, we have such an admirably diverse economy here.
Yes.
But if we fall behind on this transportation issue, that's going to really pull everything down a little bit, it would seem to me. So it seems like it's a perfect case for people to say, boy, we better figure out how we're going to divide our attention between research investments that we need to make, the other things that help create jobs, certainly education. You know, where's that stream? And if we do create more infrastructure jobs, how are we doing? What is the relationship between there's a lot of talk about the community colleges and the technical colleges. Right. How do you see that? Is that an important part of your story too?
Well, it's interesting. I have these conversations with both Chancellor Rosenstone and President Kaler. There's the human resources, and then there's the built resources in order to kind of provide access to our systems. Mm-hmm. When I travel around Minnesota, I certainly visit not just MnSCU facilities, but others. And students are one of the largest users of kind of alternative transportation systems. Yeah. But also, I visited manufacturing plants, and I'll go through the Polaris plant in Roseau, or the Hormel plant in Austin, and everything in between. And they've told me they're really thrilled to see me because logistics is their number one concern. If I see the Polaris plant and they are getting raw materials coming in one side of the plant and the snowmobiles coming out the other end, if there's a snow event, if the road goes out and they have to shut down for a day, I say, what does that cost your business? Oh. And they say, well, that's about $7 million in revenue. So I said, when you meet with your supply chain, do you have the MnDOT engineers at the table?
Oh, interesting.
Because we're part of the distribution system, and so we should be thinking about this a little bit more in a business-like manner.
So this is going to cross state lines, and I should have asked you this before, but are we going to use cheese product on our roads? And did it work in Wisconsin?
What do we have in Minnesota? We actually use taconite in some of the asphalt in the north. So,
well, there you go.
So I'm not advocate cheese.
You're not going to advocate the cheese?
No.
I don't know. I saw somebody post the difference between a Wisconsin road and a Minnesota road, and a Minnesota road was using the traditional ice, and the Wisconsin road was using whatever cheese over.
I love the idea.
Do you? I don't know. I have not a personal experience.
It's funny. I meet with other DOTs. In fact, I just came from a meeting last week and meet with the DOT commissioners from Wisconsin and Michigan and Iowa. And we have a lot of the same concerns, and so we're able to share best practices. And actually, I think there's ways to be smart about how we use taxpayers' funding. Mm-hmm. Our number one objective at MnDOT is now how to enhance our financial effectiveness. So we know that part of of our future is going to be from our own efficiency. Mm-hmm. We do that from learning from what we do, but we also learn from other states. And frankly, I'm proud to say that MnDOT, no fault of mine, is one of the leaders in innovation and ways of doing things with kind of new thinking. So
that's great.
So it's helpful, and it's gratifying to hear that.
Well, I'm very interested in, like you said, you were talking about this logistics issue and the cost when things do go down, and it does seem to me that all the different layers that we're talking about, how opening up the central corridor, which is just going to create greater efficiency. There are people who object, and it is right where I'm located, again at 280 and University, is the center of transportation, essentially, in the Twin Cities. It's the trucking center, it's a rail center, as well as driving. I mean, are you seeing how is that going between the trucking companies and those hubs and how they're dealing with the Central Corridor line now, the Green Line? How is that interface going?
Well, a robust transit system takes capacity off the roads, and we've realized that to the extent that we can free up capacity on highways, that allows actually for more freight traffic. We expect freight traffic to increase as much as 30% in the next 15 years. So where cars might be flat, as we see the economy heating up, we actually have to find, not just in the highways, certainly there's a lot more freight on our rail system, and we've certainly seen that from the oil trains coming down from North Dakota.
Yeah.
And that area where your office is, there's a lot of rail traffic through St. Paul, and we have major concerns to maintain the safety that we would expect, and also to make sure that the capacity can be handled. And so I think, again, it's a puzzle, and some of the biggest beneficiaries of transit are those actually on the road who have less congestion, or probably not less congestion, but at least we will reduce the very difficult congestion that would occur if we don't make those investments.
And it does, I love this idea of the puzzle, so helping people understand the connectivity between that which maybe they use the most, maybe it's their cars, but understanding all the different components that are coming together, and that they can, and I think even the fact that you mentioned health,
right.
Which is another factor, that we're just all healthier when we don't sit as much, and we don't have to drive as much, and we can use other forms of transportation that also increase sort of our social connection.
Well, I think of health as not just personal health, but the health of our cities, the livabilities of communities.
Right.
Many times MnDOT Road will be the main street of a community, and so we have to make sure that it's not just getting cars through fast. We have to think of other factors like the sidewalks, the bike spaces, making sure that for instance, a Snelling Avenue reconstruction will not only have express buses, but we think of it as a way to enhance the kind of the retail quality and pedestrian space, and even those that drive. So I think transportation thinking is much more broader than just get cars through a pipe fast.
Absolutely.
We have to think about a larger network and make sure we're building places that people want to live.
Absolutely. Well, we're excited that you are leading the charge, because it sounds like it's going to be a good next 10 years if we can pull it off.
Well, this is an exciting year. It's a thrill for me to be involved in it, and I'm actually very grateful that more people are thinking about transportation in the bigger picture.
That's great. That's all we have time for. Come see us again next week on the St. Paul Forum.